All right, so it's Todd Atkins. I'm back with Miguel Adirati from the MMA Museum, MMA Museum Project, and MMA Museum Podcast. And you can find that YouTube at MMA Collector 74. Subscribe to it. Please support it. And as always, before we start our episodes here, I have a sponsor, Live to Fight Design. If you use my promo code, which is Todd Atkins, you can get $20 off your order. This is for fight banners and gym banners. They do a great job. And before we start, Miguel, kind of what we're going to talk about today is Sheik Tahnoon and his starting of the ADCC, and also his involvement with Fight Island, and really helping the UFC stay alive to some extent. So Miguel was with the ADCC for about 7 years, and so Miguel, I kind of want to let you start with what you know of him and your background with the ADCC.
Okay, I went to ADCC in Abu Dhabi in 1999 for the second tournament, and I grew to be one of the promoters and to be in charge of several of the tournaments that came in the future, including critical roles in Brazil, and then obviously in New Jersey and California. I was a promoter of record for those ADCCs 2005, 2007, and then I left. So I was there. You could say I was there at the beginning. It's not the true beginning. Sheik Tahnoon is. I knew from the beginning. I always dealt with Guy Nevens. Guy Nevens was worked with Sheik, and the Sheik had people like that he assigned projects to, kind of thing. And Guy had many projects and many things going on. At one point, I know that he was looking to help him buy a yacht. At one point, they were looking to invest in soccer players. So he had projects of that nature. And I think this grappling stuff was one of the projects once he got back to Abu Dhabi. He starts to grow into a role. How did he become involved in fights? Where'd the passion come from? In California, he went to university in San Diego. I believe it was San Diego International University. I believe the story goes that the Sheik didn't reveal he was wealthy, but at the same time, I think he didn't live in the dorm. I think he lived in the hotel for 4 years, or however many years he was there, in a pretty nice Marriott. So those are things you piece together. I don't know, but that's what I know. So he went to university there, became a jiu-jitsu student, cleaned the mats. Nobody understood what they were facing in terms of, like, he's one of the wealthiest people on the planet or has access to that. But he fell in love with jiu-jitsu. So when he goes home in 1998, he does the first Abu Dhabi Invitational and uses connections to get some of the best grapplers in the world in a tournament. Kind of develops the rules of, jiu-jitsu with no gi and a couple of adaptations in the points, because since the very beginning, he went to San Diego International University because he's being prepared for a life of governing in his country. His father was the president at this time. And now I think it's his brother who's the president, and he is the head of the FBI. So his life he knew all along he was destined for those roles and that it was serious. So jiu-jitsu, I think, was a distraction in the early days, and you get less and less time for your distractions when you lead a life like that. So I think at this point, he's become more of a figurehead of, is this a good idea? Blessing, no blessing. And then people do. I think, I don't think he's been to any of the Abu Dhabi tournaments outside of Abu Dhabi. So he didn't even have time to really dedicate to that now. But back then he did. In 99, when we got there, he was doing interviews. It was the first year that there was real press there. In 98, the first year, I believe Brazilian press got there because of Sperry and Renzo being involved. But I was invited as a member of the international press for the 99 year. And when we got there, there were Japanese and European press people taking pictures, and the Sheik was interviewed. In that interview, the only exchange I ever had with him was, I told him that I think I could pull off doing these rules. This was my second year, my second time seeing there. I told him that I think we could pull off these rules around my show in a smaller level, but the rules could be used in the States. And he liked that idea, and he said he would help me. And that's the only words he ever said to me. Other than that, it was always, he put me on Guy, and when Guy needed something, we worked it out with Guy. Guy had the signing authority. So that's my extent of contact with the Sheik, but I do know in 99 or in 2000, for example, 2000 was the real explosion. From 99 to 2000 was the biggest talent jump that you could see. That's when they invited everybody, and everybody already knew it was safe and the tournament was going on and it was legit, and everybody wanted to show up, no questions. And in that year, when I saw the Sheik, he was on the mats in the Abu Dhabi Combat Club, rolling with Vitor Belfort in a white, t-shirt, sweating, just sitting there on the mats with him hands on. His passion. That's this was 2000, so he was still a young man. He was already probably in government, but not in the advance. I think, like I said, he's the head of the FBI now, for lack of a better comparison. So he had time, but he was enjoying himself, and it wasn't even appropriate to be like, hey, we need this for the event or this, that, the other thing. You just go to guy. But I just got to observe him that, and I saw him rolling with people. Belfort was the one. Belfort spoke good English at the time, all of a sudden. And, Belfort liked that role. So they were having fun in that memory. You know what I mean? And I think that's what grappling ultimately represents. Now, 20 years later, it still represents that in the Sheik's head, is that that was fun. Those were the fun days, and that's, the best I can tell you about the Sheik in terms of what I think and what I saw.
Now, what happened to Guy Evans? Do you know?
I'm sure he's still working there. I think there were family ties there. I think, Guy's father worked for the Sheik's father. And, we're talking about the rulers of Abu Dhabi. So they also had homes in London and guys from England. So I think his responsibilities were far more than this, and that he's still there. And that this is something that even he may no longer be involved with because he's doing other things. And like I said, he loves it. Guy was actually competing in the first one in the 1998 roster, So he went to the jiu-jitsu classes in San Diego, So he liked it. He had a passion for it. He was also, doing his job. And he did it extremely well for a while. So the Sheik, I'm sure, kept him, And they seemed to be friends too. I don't know, I can't even judge. It's like, did he have an irreplaceable position? In my opinion, a British guy around a VIP like that in a foreign country, a lot of people around the VIP from that country would like to have guys' connection with him. So I always thought, like I said, I get to see a very light version of them because they're happy doing this. This is their passion and fun.
So you said he's still there?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's still living in Abu Dhabi.
That's interesting. So, as we're kind of doing like a historical of, Sheikh Tahnoon and his involvement with Abu Dhabi, maybe talk about, because I want to know, like, where did they have you stay when you were there? Do you remember that stuff? Like,
sure.
Were the accommodations really nice, or how was it?
In 1998, I'm sure the first year was the most expensive show they did. And it was because I think that it was the first show. You learn lessons. When you're as wealthy as some of those people are, giving fighters that are making a couple $100 for a fight, $10,000 or something like that, to them doesn't mean that much. But they had people's attention like that from the very beginning. That it was a tournament. You went, you got paid, and it was like a VIP type of thing. So 1998, I think, was the most expensive year. 99, I went, and everything was pretty deluxe. You had a 4-star, not a 5-star pristine hotel, but a good 4-star hotel, which used to be the top notch anyway, right? And everybody stayed there, the fighters, everybody got paired off. It was my responsibility at some of the shows to put people in with their roommates and stuff like that, and then deal with the consequences of that. Some people it's a no-brainer, and then it's like you get down to like, but yeah, so the hotels were, full service, hotels. You had no issues there with anything necessary. Mini bars, you can get alcohol in the hotel for the Westerners and the foreigners and stuff like that that think, oh, it's dry there. So the accommodations were very good. They scaled them down a little bit. Like, if the first night, the first time we were there in '99, they may have used a $350 a night hotel, and then the next year they went to a $250 a night hotel. So not noticeable and really in terms of, unless you know little things, you know what I mean? But they were trying to work it into a budget. They knew that they were spending more money than they had to as well. And nobody likes to do that. So you can see that they started to try to slim down their costs from early on.
Yeah, they were probably spending way more money than they made. I mean, there was no money to be made. They didn't have an audience and stuff. Yeah,
purely out of pocket. They can hand, the Sheik has, I don't know what's his money and what's the government's money over there, but it seems to be like in a pool. And, now that's become, an investment fund on a world level and stuff like that. So they know what they're doing with their money. And I think he started playing with it, but then slowly it starts to get handed off into people that are more employed at keeping a monetary fund going and trying to do it with this or whatever. I don't know exactly what the new arrangements are, but I think he's far removed from it, but I don't think he's paying for it out of pocket anymore.
Yeah. And so what do you remember about, like, because you had the matches, obviously. Everybody's talked about those, but what do you remember kind of about maybe the first couple of events, just looking back on it?
Well, I'll answer a few questions that have been out there, among the fans. If you're listening to this, then you probably have questions around the Absolute tournament and around, so let me tell you what I saw. And this, or the idea that, the Sheik picked the winners, or, really sometimes at times even comments of that level of ignorance and stuff. So now, if you think this guy spent that kind of money, first of all, he loves the sport and part of that has to be the rawness of it, the reality of it, right? So to want to script it is just not in the same story that I've been telling, right? So it doesn't make sense at the highest level. But he does have power in the country, and if he wanted something done in his country, he can manage it to get done. So that's his reputation. But it was so far removed from it. He wanted nothing more than for this to be as fair as possible, so that it caught on a world level. So in that respect, he was successful. At some point, he put the judging in the hands of people that were qualified to judge. People from jiu-jitsu, people from different walks of life. And now many of those judges from those very beginning are from Finland and Scandinavia, because they had the most staying power. But they started to work on the judging, and the making sure that it was fair was one of his top priorities from the beginning. And in that, he deserves respect and credit. There was never any real funny business of like, well, Renzo's his friend, so he wants Renzo to win. Absolutely not. I think it was more in that respect. And again, this is an assumption too, but in that respect, they're friends. That's I quantify that, but I think he wanted to, test his friend. So he got Renzo the toughest he could when it was appropriate, just to show him, just to rib him a little bit. That's my take on it. That's how I see that. I don't think it was like, well, Renzo, come on in and we'll make you the winner and stuff like that. That's absolutely, it wouldn't have appeal to somebody like in his position. And then how do you get into the absolute? This is a good example of Sheik Tahnoon creating a system that was visibly fair. And nobody's ever publicized how you get into the absolute. But it really is a scramble on the last day of the show, because at the last day of the show, you've got the finals for the tournaments, and then you've got the super fight. So now after all the tournaments conclude, and the winners of those tournaments obviously are heavily favored in the absolute, right? So now, while the super fight is going on, you get the final applications for anybody who wants to be in the absolute. So the fighters have to come and tell us, a representative, me, Kid Peligro could be one, Guy would be another, people running around, they would have to come and say, yes, I want to be in the absolute. We make a list, everybody in the room. Sheik Tahnoon was not in the room. That's why I say I had no access to it. So at some point, if he wanted to he watched the tournaments in Abu Dhabi. So if he wanted to have a vote, he was probably voting either with Guy or Kid Peligro on the phone. But he gave us a vote. He never said, I want this guy, and this guy in the absolute. That was never what went on in any way, shape, or form. He gave us all votes, and it was very simple. It's like, all right, Todd Atkins applied. Can Todd Atkins win the absolute? Rate him possible 1 through 10. A 5, a 6. And you go around the room, you get 8 or 9 people. You know, Matt Hume voted. I'm not sure which Japanese person voted. Maybe Manabu, maybe Kawasaki. There, you know, like I said, Kid Peligro. There were. Everybody has a vote, and then you just add them up, and the top 16 go in. And if people drop out, 17 goes up, 18 goes up. I watched it on paper, developed that way. It's chaotic because it's at the last minute, but there's no doubt that it was fair. It was never the will of one guy. So, you know, if people had said that, and if people are still saying that, I want to firmly dispel that rumor, because that there's nothing further from the truth.
Yeah. Now, what are some other things besides the matches that maybe you think are important that people know about that doesn't get talked about a lot?
Well, you know, how controversial do you want to go? We did the show in 2001, in the early part of it. And then sometime in August, we were told, hey, you know what? We're going to skip next year. And then September 9/11 happens. And after that, they started doing them every 2 years. And I think that, you know, without getting into too much conspiracy or 9/11, did they know or anything like that? Let's just say that I think at that point, that's a critical juncture. Remember, Sheik Tahnoon is a person that is predestined to be working in his country's government. His father's the president, and he's been trained his whole life for that. And that just made things a lot more serious, a lot quicker. So from there, I think you see him disengaging from this project more and more.
Yeah, and 2001 was the last one he attended. I actually asked Mo that the other day.
And that was in Abu Dhabi.
He said he hasn't been to an Abu Dhabi event since 2001.
Yeah, and I think that those two things could be related. One, why, you know, it probably became harder for him to convince 100 fighters around the world again and everything, or maybe it became harder for him to assure there, because we were well received, well hosted. You know, there were no issues of you know, of any nature. The fighters were happy in terms to be there. Everybody was on their best behavior too, but nobody wanted to mess that up. So there was no, you know, so, but it might be harder after 9/11 for him to host, you know, especially because he does have a visible role in their world as well. So, but again, yeah, I think that whole world politics thing accelerated his move into the roles he's in now, and that's where we lost his hands-on, you know, love for the sport. He assigned it to Mo, or, you know, however get to Mo, and Mo is from there, right? So he's similarly wealthy. He's probably handling some type of management fund for certain people, and the Sheik probably has a high level yay or nay on everything that they like, because it's a structured society, and it's ultimately the Sheik whose name is assigned to it, is Sheik Tahnoon.
What do you know about Mo? Because I really don't know much about him.
I couldn't tell you if I met him and if he was one of the people that was assisting there, because I'm not great with names and faces, but I don't think I recognize him. I think he came along after me. And I think, you know, I don't think he knows me.
But you said you think he's from that area. I didn't even know he was, actually. He does have some of the features of
I thought I saw him wearing the head.
It's called a gutra. Gutra is what that's called.
Okay, and his name is Mo Jazim, which
yeah.
Mo is Muhammad, so Muhammad Jazim. That sounds plenty Arabic to me. Maybe he's not from Abu Dhabi, but he's got to be somebody. Put it this way: I don't think he's from the fight world. He didn't emerge. He wasn't a fighter that was participating and then grew into that. I don't know him.
Yeah, he's big into jiu-jitsu too. So
yeah, and that's that. But if you were a jiu-jitsu person, that's not the fighting stuff that was going on with the early invitations in Abu Dhabi. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't know him. I know he's done a fantastic job. The last show looked like the Super Bowl, and at the end of the day, it's a great sign of growth. It's great, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's great. You know, it's good that he's there and we're not, because it might have kept, you know, smaller. But it's gotten very big.
Now, what do you know about his involvement with the UFC? Like people, I think your average fan, they see Fight Island, they haven't really looked behind the scenes of how that even came to pass. Um, and obviously he had bought like what 10% of the UFC or something like that.
At some point during the Fertitta reign, they needed a cash influx, and the Sheik bought 10%. Sheik Tahnoon bought 10% of the UFC, and at that point, they had more hands-on involvement. I don't know exactly how that relationship ended, but I understand that it has ended. And there are opportunities, when especially, and I know that, I don't want to digress too far, but especially when you see them backing Power Slam. You wonder why it isn't that they didn't dedicate support to something legitimate like the Abu Dhabi Grappling World Championships and that whole network. And as you can see in Mo's hands, it's turned into something, profitable and worldwide. With a little love and dedication, they could have done that. But they were together, and for whatever reason, it didn't work out completely. But it wasn't, I don't think they threw stones at each other either. It was not worth it, because I don't think Fight Island, they wouldn't have built that or anything like that if Sheik Tahnoon had been vehemently against it. So at some point, I think he's one of the frontline rulers of the country. So at some point, if he wants it or doesn't want it, everybody below him wants to make sure that his will is taken into account. So this deal wouldn't have happened if he wasn't okay with it. And they're making money. That's probably what the situation is. All that money he spent on, paying bar tabs that, Brazilians left, and phone bills that Brazilians left, in Abu Dhabi and stuff like that, he was now getting back. So but again, that's a lot of that speculation. But I think it doesn't stray too far from the truth. You wouldn't do it in Abu Dhabi if the Sheik had said, no, those guys double crossed me on a deal, I don't want to deal with them. That didn't happen, but it did end.
Now, that cash influx, was that, had they not got that, how would that have worked out? I mean, his contribution, how important was that to keeping this going, you think?
Yeah, now you're asking, we're in a world of speculation. At the end of the day, if Lorenzo and Frank went to Tillman and said, I need $15 million, the family's got it around. You know what I mean? So, but I understand, it's much better to get a partner, a heavy hitting partner, a partner that could lead to benefits in many other ways, such as, for example, many years down the line, it developed into having an alternate venue where they can bring in fighters that they can no longer bring into the United States. So it's actually led to very, very positive businesses for the UFC. And in the terms of Abu Dhabi, I think one of their greater goals is to keep the country in general on the international front line. So they're involved in museums, and they're involved in, golf, and they're involved in this and that, because they want to show a wide array of range. I think this is at the end of the day too, the Abu Dhabi Combat Club and everything is also part of a presentation package of the country itself. That's why, it's been run great, because it got a lot of good attention from the high ups in the country. And, that's led to benefits for the UFC. So that's the best I can tell you.
Yeah, and it's still his show, because I had asked Mo about that he was doing a live, and I had asked him what his involvement was. He says it's still his show and he still supports it financially, but he just doesn't attend the events,
Yeah.
Because I was like, you don't see him around. What's his involvement still? And he thought, oh, he's still involved. It's just that, he's not attending the events, and he's too busy to, just do anything.
I know that we did the show in Sao Paulo, was the first one outside of Abu Dhabi, is 2003. And then we did 2005 in Los Angeles. And then we did 2007 in New Jersey. So the next three events were way out of the same time zone. So it was like 9 out, it was a weird time when the events were running there. But at least for a couple of those, we wanted to get a live feed back to Abu Dhabi, and he wanted to see the show live as it was going on as best he could. By the end of that, I think, again, like I said, you get to the point where you're actually too busy with your real life to dedicate to the hobby. And I think that's where we kind of fell out of his immediate range. But yeah, I think he still sees them. Once they go down, he probably has somebody assigned, maybe Muhammad. There was an old guy there that was his IT guy for a long time named Muhammad. Maybe he's still there. He gets, now they don't do DVDs, but hey, send me a file in my email of the highlights of the event. And he watches it, and, he knows Gordon Ryan, and, that's the extent of his involvement now. Money, yeah. And again, he's the front line of the country. So, like, big money is going to be spent. He's got to approve it.
Yeah, I was asking him, I was like, can't you like do an interview with this guy or something just so people can see him? And he's like, there's only like a less than 0% chance I could do it. That's what he said. He's like, yeah, you'll never see him do it.
Yeah, I think, I wonder if Joe Rogan called him, if he would consider it, because if he went on with a good presentation, that would be beneficial to an overall media drive. So, like, I wonder if that he would even rule that out. But it's the same, because we're smaller, we don't have that kind of juice. It's the same thing as, like, what if we wanted to interview John McCain over why he didn't like MMA? He'd never get in the door to do that interview. So it's the same thing. Those guys are government over there. He's worried about a lot more than this. And he doesn't want to look silly either, right? Yeah. So, hey, who won the last tournament? Oh, shit, he doesn't remember. He doesn't need any of that.
Yeah. Plus Joe Rogan, he's kind of got a reputation for some things that aren't accepted in Muslim culture,
No, I understand. And he might decide to not do it. I remember Chimaev said, I wouldn't do it because he smokes pot. But at the end of the day, it is
exactly
the #1 podcast for many years, and if he decide, but that would be something he would have to make a decision to go on with a prepared script and a presentation, or be as ready as possible. I think he'd have fun doing it. I think it'd be an amazing podcast.
Yeah, if Joe went there, I think maybe you could do it.
Joe's the only one who has a chance, I think, because of name recognition. Because other than that, you're just going to get shut down. It's like, this is too insignificant, in his life at this point.
Yeah, it would be interesting, though. I think Joe would have to go there, though. I don't see him coming to here.
Joe's got the money. Joe Biden, you can even go first class, Joe. I'm telling you. I'm sure he could, but I don't think he's hurting for, guests either. But I'm saying that, to just think he's going to come on a podcast to talk about this, I think now you're talking about a guy whose day is the time of his day is programmed, and he ain't going to spend any of his whatever downtime for his kids or whatever to come on, give us a half hour. Not happening. I understand, Mo. I understand.
Who were some competitors during your time that stood out to you for a certain reason, In
Abu Dhabi?
Yeah, while you're with them.
Oh, in the early days, now I think it's a very grappling heavy competition, because most of the positions are filled by people who've qualified and people who've kept the record competing under their rules. And that's something that didn't happen at the very beginning of the stuff, obviously. And, like, for example, Mark Kerr's dominance in the sport. Mark Kerr's an MMA fighter. Mark Kerr is one that I remember. Mark Kerr didn't have a point scored against him until he lost to Arona. But Hoyler Gracie, Henzo Gracie, that type of name, I don't know. We may be in an in-between time where they're not old enough to be legends yet, but they should be. Those are the people should still be looking at and trying to see, old competitions and things. Those would be the names, Marcelo Garcia, there's so many because, and then there are guys that you had personal exchanges with, I remember a British guy that competed in the early days. His name was Dexter Casey. And later on, he came and fought an MMA fight in hook and shoot. So, yeah, you have a lot. I have a lot of memories of the actual events and stuff. And, things going crazy. Just, at some point, the Sheik was wanting to concentrate on a fight. So he's like, all right, shut the other mat down. So it's like, okay. So the other mat shut down. Cameramen go on break, everything like that. The match the Sheik was interested in was like over. So he's like, all right, we can go start the other mat again. It's like, oh, it's not that easy, It's like, but you can't be like, all right, yeah, we'll get to it. You got to have some effort. He wants to see that you're reacting as well. He doesn't want to be embarrassed. Like he told those guys to do something and they didn't do it because it isn't, he's accustomed. So yeah, it led to some chaos and interesting moments and things, but at the end of the day, we survived and the tapes were made. And that's, I think, was the end goal.
Let's talk a little bit about Kerr because I think that's an interesting topic because he was pretty dominant in the tournament. And I'd say he was kind of one of like the first wrestlers that was really dominant in that tournament. And obviously he, became very famous as a fighter. But kind of maybe summarize, Kerr and Abu Dhabi.
I think Abu Dhabi, not MMA, is his greatest moment. It was the moment where he was still scary. And then, in MMA, nobody wanted to get hit by the guy. When he started Abu Dhabi, he was still undefeated. Kneed people's teeth down their throat. His punches looked heavy. He looked like he had technique. And he was looking like that very, very fearsome dude. And when he comes to Abu Dhabi and wins it, because at the end of the day, he was kind of boring, and he knew from wrestling competition how to get through a grappling tournament mentally and everything real well. So he was suited to this. And he played a safe game, kind of boring, like I said. Played a safe game, but nobody could do anything with him. And the reputation he comes out of with is that he wins. So he went to another sport and he won there too. So it was his high point, and then it was the signal that the wheels came off.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing to kind of end on. Kerr was, kind of like an enigma in a way. And, it was interesting how, like you were saying, you think that was his greatest achievement. That's a big thing to say, because obviously he had success and pride in the UFC.
But yeah, no, clearly Abu Dhabi was the run he had in Abu Dhabi at the beginning, and then including his position in history where he handed the torch off to Ricardo Arona, another, for lack of a better term, another broken hero from that era, But yeah, you had the best in the world competing at that point and taking it more serious than many other competitions because it was Abu Dhabi. It was kind of like a magic moment in the last three that were in Abu Dhabi. You had 100 of the world-class competitors all there, very hungry. It was not like anything you've ever seen before. Now they're all jiu-jitsu guys and they all know each other, and it's almost like the NBA where they've all played together since they were kids. You know what I mean? Now it's the same thing. They've come up in tournaments. They know each other from here, from that. That dichotomy of throwing Mark Kerr in the mix and, Tito Ortiz and, Ruben Asado from Japan and the range of people that they offered at the very beginning, they were the first international show.
Yeah. Yeah, they had all kinds of guys who, if you had a reputation, I think the UFC was kind of like that too. If you had a reputation early in the UFC days, like maybe just after Merowitz, early Zuffa, like now anybody can get in the UFC. You can have a handful of fights and you can't not be good at anything really and get on Dana White's Contender Series.
In 1998, when Abu Dhabi started, and it's always kept a similar format, 16-man tournaments, single elimination in 5 weight classes. So that's 80. There's women in later years, and in the early years, they also did a Arab tournament. because they knew the Arab competitors were a little further behind the world in jiu-jitsu, so they wanted them to have their own champions and their own stuff. So in one weekend, they employed more fighters than the UFC did in that year by a lot. Even if you just concentrate on the 80 guys that were the core guys, with those 80 guys coming there, they employed more fighters than the UFC in those years. Because the UFC would have done 4 or 5 shows with 5 or 8 fights. Not 5, but say 5 or 6 shows, 8 fights, 48 fights. You're right there. So this was when they said Abu Dhabi is going down this month, it was important. And in the MMA world, like the early UFC couldn't afford to run against it. All the fighters wanted to go there. So it'd be, now it fits into everybody's calendar and they work with the UFC and this, that, or the other thing. But you can't understand how big it was in the early days unless you start taking that into perspective. 100 fighters. There were alternates there. 100 fighters all in one weekend. The UFC's never done anything that big.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do feel like it felt more international than it does now, even because they were taking guys who had reputations from these different countries. They didn't have any grappling tournament decide who these people would be. They had a lot of guys from Brazil, obviously, but they got guys like John Olav from, I think, Scandinavia or whatever. He ended up.
That's an interesting story. Yeah. Let me tell you that. This is really fascinating. The year before John Olav shows up, if you look at it, I'm not sure if I think it was, I remember one athlete's name. His name is Nico Malm. And this is something that, is my respect to Nico Malm. He actually has a position in history here. But he was never even close to the level of anybody on that competition. This is a guy that trained in his gym, in his garage or whatever, and had, this happened to us in MMA as well, guys that wind up invited to do a fight where they're not qualified, and so the very first person that showed up from Scandinavia was an unqualified fighter that got wiped out. And that arose the angst of John Olav. There's a black belt that was the first Swedish black belt named Ricard Anderson, and then Joaquin Hansen. They were real fighters up there, and they all realized, they needed. There was a pride in it that the first competitor from there was somebody that was kind of going to be made fun of in the future. So that's where those guys came. And that's something, again, that doesn't happen anymore, where you have unqualified competition. You got that every once in a while. The first year, there were a couple of the first year, MMA journalist and convicted murderer Rafael Torre competed.
Yep.
I don't want to put anyone down because at this point, 20, 25 years down the line, everybody's certain level of toughness. We've already figured out Randy Couture's elite. And if you were training in your basement, you weren't that elite. But there were guys that were invited that were, I have a 70-0 record from, grappling in my gym, in my dojo, in my basement. Ryan Apollinario in the first year is a name like that from those old days, which my respect to Ryan, I know Ryan was known in the early days, but then when he got to world level competition, it didn't work out as great for him. He never became a UFC fighter or anything like that. So it's just a blast from the past name. But that type of thing will never happen again. The competition will never be hurting for, all right, well, I know who that is, so put him in there.
Yeah. But they also had guys who, were very successful that probably wouldn't be in the Abu Dhabi now, like Mark Robinson. You remember Mark Robinson? He was hugely successful.
If you think Mark Robinson today couldn't win a qualifier, though, you'd probably be wrong. But he'd probably have to go that route. And unless he had some type of resume, at this point, if he won a gold medal wrestling or some type of, Commonwealth Games or something, I don't know what his resume was, but I know that from the early days, a guy like Mark Robinson, you just get the picture, the tape, and he's in. I want to see that. And yeah, some of that went on in the early days. They made good choices too. Robinson was a fun competitor. He fought in the UFC. He's a guy that I think got a lot of raw deals everywhere he went. He was South African and never got respect. Like I don't remember him having like a handler or a friend that was there with him or anything like that. Just showed up alone to do the work in Abu Dhabi. I'm sure with UFC he had handlers and stuff, but I think Mark Robinson's actually one of the good guys from those old early days. I think I don't remember what the controversial story is, but there's a controversy around him in Abu Dhabi.
I think he won one year, didn't he?
He actually won the title,
Yeah.
but I think, I'm pretty sure that it came down to a judge's decision that took him out, and then somebody, I think he was on the cusp of winning one and got some type of ill treatment, but I don't remember. But Mark Robinson from those early days I think that's a good example of a guy that they took a chance on, and it turned out to be really good.
Yeah. Well, Miguel, I think this is another great topic. I want to thank you for taking time to do this one. And I know we talked about the MMA Museum the last time. Do you have any updates since the last one that we spoke about?
Just cruising right along. If you can give us a little love and support and share and like and subscribe. We're at MMA Collector 74 on YouTube, and the museum podcast is there with interviews, and we've got some memorabilia, TV show type delivery stuff that we do. There's a lot there for you to have fun with.
All right, Miguel. So, appreciate your time on this subject. Always have great information, and for everyone who supports this, like I said, go to Miguel's, the MMA Collector, which Miguel's involved with, MMA Collector 74 YouTube. Subscribe to it, support it. And until next episode, take care.